Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. Kendrick Lamar said they not like us. And guess what else? They cannot beat us. They cannot break us. They cannot destroy us. Why not? Because we African Americans descended from brave, courageous, heroic, and tenacious people. Our history is filled with story after story after story of us overcoming the hell of white supremacy. And what I'm going to share with you today is one of those stories. It's a story of victory and resilience, but it also reminds us that our struggle is not over until we completely win. So 60 years ago today, our people bled on the infamous Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was March 7th, 1965, what we now call Bloody Sunday. It was to accomplish two things. First, it was in protest to the brutal murder of a young black man named Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was a 26-year-old church deacon from Marion, Alabama. He was helping the movement in a voting rights campaign. Second, they used his death to push harder for voting rights. So on this day, 60 years ago, 600 black men and women were marching for the right to vote, and they were met with batons, tear gas, guns, vicious dogs, and men full of hatred. They were beaten, trampled upon, left bloodied on the pavement. Some thought that it was the end. But they don't tell you what happened next. For some reason, this isn't emphasized. Our people went back to that bridge, and ultimately we won. Black people have beat worst, and we're still here. That's because they can't beat us. On that Sunday morning, John Lewis, Hosea Williams, Amelia Borton, and hundreds of others walked out of Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama. So you see, the church, the black church, has always been a part of our struggle. They marched toward Montgomery to demand their constitutional right to vote, a right being stripped from them by racist policies and intimidation and violence. Listen, the 15th Amendment had given us the right to vote 100 years earlier. But as they reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge, state troopers stood in their way. They were armed with clubs and tear gas and whips, and they were ready to send a strong message. And they attacked those marchers. John Lewis got his skull cracked open. Amelia Borton was beaten unconscious. Men, women, and children were trampled under horses, suffocating in clouds of tear gas. And for what? For daring to demand what was already theirs. The images of that day shocked the nation. But here's what most people don't realize. That wasn't the end of the story. No. Because 2 days later, on March 9th, 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led thousands of people back to that same bridge. They courageously knelt in prayer, refusing to back down. They did not back down because they can't break us, and we have beaten worse. So on March 15th, then President Lyndon Johnson gave a speech to Congress, and he identified with the marchers. In fact, during the speech, he repeated the civil rights slogan, "We shall overcome." And then on March 17th, 1965, President Johnson went further and he submitted voting rights legislation to Congress. And then on March 21st, 1965, just 2 weeks after being brutally beaten, our people marched again. They set out from Selma to Montgomery, a 54-mile walk. They were determined, and this time they had federal protection. This time there were tens of thousands of marchers with them. And on March 25th, 1965, they reached Montgomery victoriously. What did their suffering produce? Well, that same year, on August 6, 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, securing the very right that marchers were brutalized for, and that we today utilize to pick the representatives of our choice. Yes, they beat us, but they couldn't stop us, because black people have beat worst, and they cannot beat us. They cannot break us. They cannot destroy us. Now here we are 60 years later. They're not using nightsticks and horses anymore, dogs and fire hoses. They're using voter ID laws, racial gerrymandering, felony disenfranchisement, and the SAVE Act, to name a few. They're closing polling places in black neighborhoods while flooding white communities with easy access to the ballot box. They're banning black history from schools because they're afraid of the truth. They're using the Supreme Court to gut the Voting Rights Act, the very Voting Rights Act those people bled for, but they still cannot beat us. And just like in 1965, they want us to believe that we're hopeless, that we're in a mess that is irreversible, that we may as well give up and just let fear keep us from doing anything to push forward our progress. They want us to believe that we're powerless, basically, that we can't win. But I came to tell you today, that is a lie, because we've beat worse, and they cannot beat us. They not like us. They cannot destroy us. Because if they couldn't break us then, think about it, they won't break us now. Black people have beat worst. And if you don't believe me, let me take you to the scriptures. How did our people remain courageous and resilient in the face of virulent white supremacy? Here's how they did it. They depended on God. They knew they were not marching alone. They marched with the courage of Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt. They marched with the faith of King David, who stood gallantly in front of Goliath. They marched knowing Isaiah 54:17, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. And today, that same courage, that same faith must continue to guide us. They tell us America is too racist to change. No, we've beaten worse. They say voting doesn't matter, that it doesn't change our situation. No, we've beaten worse. They tell us justice is impossible. Then explain why slavery ended. Explain why we were able to get rid of Jim Crow. Explain why Black Wall Street rose again. Because we've beaten worse, and they cannot beat us. Now the question is, what are we going to do? What is this generation going to do? Because those marchers, they passed the baton to us. John Lewis, Martin Luther King, Amelia Boynton, they're not here now. Those elders who fought for our rights, they're watching to see if we will fight ourselves, to see if we will stand as courageous as they did. Are we going to let them strip away our rights without any resistance? Are we going to let fear of martial law cause us to just stand down and stand back? That's what some of you are being told. Are we going to just sit back while they erase history? Are we going to let them discourage us from voting, organizing, and mobilizing? Or are we going to cross the bridge? There's a bridge in front of us. Are we going to just stand on the one side of this bridge and let fear, intimidation, disinformation cause us to not go over this bridge? This isn't just history. Folks, this is now. This is present. Our ancestors didn't bleed on that bridge for us to be silent today. Now, we know that there are folks out there who dismiss their sacrifices, who tell us that we shouldn't vote or that voting doesn't matter. There are folks who say that. But these people, our ancestors, were attacked, but they came back. They were beaten, but they marched again, and they won. Now it's our turn to keep going back again and again and again until we win. We can win this fight. We have 400 years of history on our side, because no matter how much they try to break us, how much they try to beat us, we have beaten much, much worse. And we will win this time as well. So you know what? Let's get to work. We got work to do. Let's get to work. And the first thing I want you to do is to go to lljp.org and join our movement. Also, while you're there, go into your pockets, please, and make a donation, because we want to flip Congress in 2026. Advance 2026. The mission of it is to flip Congress in 2026. How? Well, very simply, approximately 17 million black people didn't vote November 2024. We just need a good fraction of those people to get to the polls, and we can turn this around in a hurry. All right? So, remember Bloody Sunday. Yes, it was bloody, but we also got the victory. Why? Because they can't beat us. We have beat much worse. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video. And remember, stay woke.